Thanks very much for inviting us to come along and tell you all about the Barossa Goldfields. We think it's a hidden gem of the Barossa Valley that not a lot of people know about. The Barossa is well known for its wine and its vineyards and that, but the Goldfields is there, and even people who live in the Barossa have never heard of it, so it's good to come along and tell you all about it. So, next slide. The story behind the Barossa Goldfields, Historical Society, its cottage headquarters, and the Goldfields themselves. Next one. What I'm going to go through tonight, several stages: the formation of the Goldfield Society, Bowden's Cottage, various displays, Parrawera Conservation Park trails, how it all started, Sims Rush, and large-scale gold mining. Excuse me. So, a few of us in Cockatoo Valley near the Goldfields got together back in the middle of 1987 and thought we ought to do something about preserving the history because it was all being lost. And the Goldfields themselves cover a huge area in the Parrawera Conservation Park, and the government just wanted to fence it all off so nobody could go and visit there, which we didn't think was the right thing to do. So we set up, helped them set up self-interpretive trails through the park, so now you can walk through the park 24/7 and see all of the remnants of the Goldfields. And that. So, next slide there. That's the front entrance to our home, or our cottage as we call it. It's right at the top end of Goldfields Road. Does anybody know Goldfields Road at Cockatoo Valley? It's 4 kilometres long and it's right up the top if you ever want to go. And that area is now actually being reclassified as Barossa Goldfields, not Cockatoo Valley anymore. Next slide. Just a welcome sign in front of the cottage. It gives a very brief history of the cottage and what's done there. Next one. Now I want you to keep this picture of the cottage itself in your mind for a few moments. Does anybody here remember Iris Stevenson? Yeah, a few, that's good. Iris was quite well known in the early days in the Gawler area. She was a wonderful horsewoman and had an Order of Australia medal for working with handicapped children and horses. But Iris came into Gawler back in the during the Big Depression, back in 1930 or a bit before. Her family had been looking after a cattle station on the Broken Hill railway line, and the father got his legs crushed in a horse and cart accident. They found Gawler too busy, so they went out to Cockatoo Valley and pitched a tent up on the Goldfields. Now, what happened then was the father couldn't walk, so Iris had to carry all the bricks or blocks and rocks and the mud and the water to the house, or they were going to build the house. So they lived in a tent while that was being built. And she lived there for many, many years, had 3 children, and finally left there in mid-1950s. However, after they left, people used to come and camp in the cottage, and scout groups visited too, but the government didn't like that very much, so they pulled the roof off. Once the roof came off, the vandals got in. So just hold that picture, if you'll show the next slide. In 1990, we were able to negotiate with the park to take over the cottage because it was going to be bulldozed, and we thought it was too good to be bulldozed. So that's one picture of the front of it. Just the next slide to show you the back of it. That's what it looked like. Now, there's a couple of guys there. There was a team of about 5 guys who were about my age back then, in 1990, and they spent 2 years. They came up every Tuesday morning and just worked and worked and worked, and they rebuilt the cottage as it was when Iris lived there. Iris was alive at the time, so she was very happy that the work was being done to rebuild her cottage. So, one thing we were lucky that it's part of that Parrawera Conservation Park, So we didn't have to go through all the legal jargon to rebuild the cottage. One government department did give us a 10-page document about how we should rebuild it. And one thing that really stuck out in my mind, they said we had to underpin the foundations. So I talked to Iris and she said there weren't any foundations, we just put the rocks on the ground. And that's how it is, stood all this time. So next slide. So that's the, can you get a bit better focus on that, or is that, that's the main room now. Yeah, that's okay. You can see the whitewashed walls and the hessian ceiling, and it's a lovely little cottage. It's become our headquarters and a bit of a community centre, really. Just next slide. One of the rooms we converted into a museum room, and you can see in there some of the stuff to do with the gold mines. A big skip in the middle, and in the background, if you just put the next slide on, that's the scale model of the Lady Alice mine, which was over at the front of Parawira Conservation Park, just a bit north, a bit south of where the main entrance is. And that was given to us a few years ago, because once again it was going to be chucked out from another organisation. So next slide. And I love this little, it's a 5-head stamper for crushing the ore as it comes out of the ground, and it stands about that high. Beautiful little model. The person who made it put a lot of work into it. Can you just go back one slide there just for a sec? Just briefly how this works. You can see, sorry, I should get my point. This thing here, it's called a whim, and that would have had a horse attached to it. The horse would walk around and round and around, winding up a rope. The rope would come up here, down the middle of the poppet head, down to the bottom of the mine. It would be filled up with the ore to be crushed, and then the horse would be turned around and walk the other way around to wind the bucket back up. So I always pitied the horse. I think must have got giddy at the end of the day doing that all the time. Next slide. And this little crushing head's a beautiful little working model that actually works. We have a display shed with old tools in there. We do have a lot of school groups coming through, and we like showing them the old equipment before electricity was around to do everything. Everything's handmade, everything's heavy. One of the things I like to talk about is the tubs. Water was very scarce in the gold mining era, so the first person to get the bath was the baby, then the children, then the mother, and then the dirty miner would have the last bath, and then they used the water pan for their gold. It was very, very precious because water was a big problem. Next slide. This is actually the old jail cell that the locals tell us was on the site during the big gold rush. It went over to Williamstown and was there locked up for many years. And then when they built a new police station, we were able to get that and refurbish it. So we like letting the school kids get in there and shutting the door on them and that sort of thing. Have a bit of fun with them. Next one. That's just a general view of the area that we have. You can see here some skips, a Wilfley table that I'll talk about in a minute, and the cottage before. That's on the corner of Allendale and Goldfields Road. Next slide. We have a replica of a poppet head. To give you an idea of the size of the things, they're huge. They're put over the top of the gold mine shaft to bring the ore up from down below. This is a 3-head stamper that's in pieces at the moment. Very heavy piece of equipment. Next slide. This is called a Wilfley table, and the big miners still use these today. It's driven by a steam engine or a powered engine, and it shakes backwards and forwards, vibrates really more than shakes. And the ore is put on the top of that, and it would have riffle boards along the top, and would separate the heavy gold from the overburden. Next slide. This is a visual display about the Barossa Goldfields. The park people rebuilt all the self-interpretive signs inside the park, So we were able to get the old ones, which are still in very good condition, put it up as a display. Next slide. We have an open day in September every year, and it's on the 25th of September this year if you want to come, COVID permitting. That's our big worry. We haven't been able to have it for the last couple of years because of COVID. That's just our typical miners tent. They come with just a pick and a shovel, canvas top, and a lot of people on the site at the time. Sometimes if they've been there a while, they would build a little over a stone wall and then put the canvas over the top to make it a little bit more permanent. Next slide. Showing people how to pan for gold. The kids really love this. And we must confess that we do sort of put some stuff in for them to collect little gems and things. So we haven't found many nuggets in that, much as we'd like to. Also, next slide. The Sing Australia group loves coming up, putting on a display, beautiful music and songs. Enters in our open day. Next slide. We have a machinery display, all sorts of engines going there. Next one. And this is the best part of the day. Back in the 1860s when all this happened, Adelaide didn't have a police force or an army. So there was this group of men who were volunteers. They just volunteered to form themselves in a little group to keep the peace and everything. And this mob here is called Adelaide Regiment 1862. They love coming up here and they demonstrate their marching skills and how they operate, and of course firing blank. Gunpowder goes everywhere, smoke. Great noise and it's ridiculous too. They're very keen on that black powder stuff. Okay, next one. Right, moving on now to Parawira Conservation Park. Just recently, in the last few years, this has been changed from a national park to a conservation park, which means that you can't take anything out of the park. You can't go fossicking for gold, you can't use metal detectors. There's plenty of photos, but that's all. We work very closely with the park rangers doing all of this. And as you heard earlier, Leonie here is a volunteer park ranger. So they help us and we help them. Right, next one. This is a map of the walks you can do to see the various mine shafts and things in the park. This is Goldfields Road along here, Allendale Road here. Our cottage is on this corner. And this little walk around here takes about 45 minutes, and that's where you get a lot of information for the shortest time. You get, the parks have made it very safe now. They've fenced that all off, so there's just fenced off walkways. And the mine shafts they fenced around so no one can fall in. But there's still lots we haven't seen. In fact, Leslie and Leonie and I were up there last Tuesday and we found a new shaft that we'd never seen before. So it's interesting. This bigger one is called the Phoenix Tunnel Loop. That takes a couple of hours to walk around. And then the Lady Pierce Loop is around this big one. That takes about 4 hours and you need to be fairly well prepared for that one with water and hats and that sort of thing. Next slide. Now getting on to the time of the Goldfields rush, where this plaque is, it was the home of Henry Woodyfield. Just behind you can see that's Allendale Road and a big pepper tree there where his house was. He was the carrier that brought all the supplies up from Gawler. He had bullock wagons and horse teams. And interesting aside from that, his great-great-grandson is one of our members still, so we have a genetic link back to Henry Woodyfield. Next slide. This is the entrance to the Victoria Hill Self-Interpretive Walk, the start of where you walk down a trail. And what they've done is, there's a sign showing you everything. You can see the map there and that sort of thing. It tells you all about it. And as you go down, you'll see the shafts and mullock heaps, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And it's very well presented. how the park have worked to make it safe for everybody. They fenced the main shafts off like this, so that you can get up close, you can actually look down them, and of course the kids always like to throw a stone down to see how heavy how deep it is. Next slide, there's a series of these. Now that's a view down a typical mine shaft, and if you look what the miners had to dig through to get there, they were just incredible people, very tough. It was just very, very hard work, and a lot of them made some money and a lot of them didn't make anything. The next one, it's another shaft. Now you can see round here is the mullock heap, what we call the mullock heap, or the overburden, because what they were looking for was an old lake bed way down that it was over millions of years had been buried, so they had to get rid of the overburden to get down to where the gold was in the lake bed. So you can see from this mullock heap around here that was a fairly deep shaft. Right, next one. It's just another one that's overgrown. Right, next again. Another one the same. Yeah, next. This is a horizontal shaft following a reef. The bigger miners were looking for reef gold, which is gold that's embedded in rocks. And then they just get on a vein of it and just follow the vein till it runs out. And that was a horizontal shaft, not a vertical one. Next slide. Right, this is a chronological sequence of gold discovery. Next slide. I'll read it out anyway. January 1861, men were leaving South Australia to chase their fortune to the Victorian goldfields, so the South Australian government offered a reward of £1,000 to anybody that could find a workable goldfields. And there were some conditions on it. It had to have 500 licences issued in the first month. It had to have a payable amount of gold coming out of it, and a few other rules. Later on, this was increased to £5,000, which is a huge amount of money back in the 1860s. It's just a colossal amount. Okay, so that's the next one. Licence fee was set, sorry, just go back one. Licence fee was $30 to work a 20 square foot claim on Crown land. 30 shillings, sorry, not dollars, I'm a bit ahead of myself. Okay, next one. Right, what happened next was the exciting part. A chap came into the Sandy Creek pub one day saying, I think I've found some gold. Job Harris, who was the publican there at Sandy Creek, pricked up his ears. He immediately got a group of men and went out where this chap said he'd found some gold. And they very quickly found quite a lot in Spike Gully, halfway down Goldfields Road. And they tried to keep it quiet, but once the press got on it, soon people started arriving. The numbers vary, but I think here it says 400, within a week 1,500 men were on the Barossa Goldfields. That might be a bit optimistic, but nearly 500 miners' rights were issued in the first few days. By the end of the month, about 5,000 men were at the diggings. Nearby towns were left to be run by women. So that was a problem. Okay, next. Three townships evolved: Yatta, Victoria Hill and Barossa. Barossa was the largest, and it was quite a shanty town really, but you can see from that it's 7 hotels, 5 general stores, 4 butcher shops, 2 shoemakers and several blacksmiths' workshops. We think most of the money was made from the pubs. There was also a doctor, policeman and a warden on the site. The warden was in charge of licences and that sort of thing. It also had an institute, school and a post office and was functional up to the 1950s, although the numbers had decreased over the years from the 1930s on. Next one. Oh, this is not very good, but I'll try and point it out. Goldfields Road is down here along this line here, and Goldfields Road is sort of like a gully, and that's where the first rush was in here, about in the middle. Our cottage is on this corner here, and there was Victoria Hill diggings were here, and then later on bigger diggings through the park. So that's where it all started from. Okay. now this is how the township, photography wasn't very good in those days, so we've only got a couple of photos of the actual Barossa township. And this here, would you believe, is Goldfields Road, still along the same path today. And you can see some of the buildings, they weren't buildings, they were really tent city, shanty town. Next one, it's another picture of it. Unfortunately, like I said, the photography wasn't very good back in those days. But there were certainly a lot of people. By the end of the year, there was 5,000 people there. Many men brought their wives and families up, and that was a very functioning sort of town. Later on, in the later 1860s, next slide, Gavin built a school called the Broster School. That's still there today. It's a private dwelling now. It's a beautiful old building, and one of our early members, who's passed away now, lived on the Goldfields during the Big Depression. And if you ever went on one of the walks, you can see where his house was. And the story has it he had a rabbit hutch. His dad built him a rabbit hutch. And one day the rabbit wasn't there anymore, and he couldn't work out why, but I think it went in the pot. He said it was a great time of his life, though. His father just panned for gold or got odd jobs, and very little pressure, no money, of course. And he had to walk to school, 2 or 3 k's through the scrub, and he had to arrive at school with clean shoes. So he just used to take his shoes off when he left home, walk barefoot through, and when he got to school, he put his shoes back on. So that's how he got around it. Great guy to talk to. Next one. I've sort of been through that. Miners were really looking for alluvial gold from riverbeds, later reef gold from quartz, mainly by the larger mining companies. Later on, like I said, many people brought their wives and children up. It was a pretty rough life and very harsh. Next one. Now this is how they used to work. This is where the gold was. This is the underneath, would have been on top of the lake bed in that area. So they had to dig through all this overburden to get to where the gold was in the lake bed. And this overburden, they just dig up and chuck around the outside, and that's how the mullock heaps around a mine shaft. They had no interest in this because there's nothing in it. They usually worked in pairs, one guy with winding the windlass here and the other guy on the bucket. When they got down to where the gold-bearing layer was, they'd either dig through it and then scrape the ceiling off. And I've been in one of the shafts where that's been done. You could actually walk in there. And others just dug to this level and scratched around on the floor. So there was 2 ways of getting it. So the rough ore would come up in the bucket, and then in the daytime they'd work their butts off getting that up. And then in the evenings they'd crush it with dolly pot and that sort of thing, and then pan it for the gold. Mainly looking for small little bits of gold, not many big nuggets. Okay, next one. They needed timber. They denuded the area because they needed timber to shore up their shafts and burn for their fires. And it was just used up, totally denuded, but largely it's regrown now. Nature regrows if you leave it long enough, so they're very lucky there. Water was always a problem. The government was petitioned to get a water supply to the mine, to the goldfields, but the government said, not our problem. So the guys got together and gave a few days a week, and they built quite a number of dams. There's 2 you can still see today, although they're getting very overgrown now. Right. Nobody can ever work out how much gold was taken from the goldfields, because I think a lot of people just snuck it out themselves, didn't register it, And of course the Victorian government was paying more for gold than South Australian government, so some of it went over interstate. But they say between 50,000 ounces and 100,000 ounces, which is a pretty substantial figure. Crushing plants were established slowly, but the main rush was worked out by 1873, but people stayed there for many, many years after that. Other small brief rushes occurred at Sims Rush in 1887 and Yatta Hill Rush in 1889. So next one. These are a few images from the Sims Rush working as it is today. That began in 1887. Next slide. This is actually on the front of my property, and my lad and his mates were going to dig this out. So they dug down a fair way, but they found out what the miners found out during winter. It filled up with water, so that was a problem. So next slide. You can see the mullock heap around the shaft, and where the ground has been disturbed, the regrowths come there because the ground's soft. One of the things, Mr. Sim was from private property, and Mr. Sim owned this land, and he let the miners, they'd paid him a licence fee to mine in it, but he had a rule that when you finish digging the hole, you have to fill it in. You can imagine how they felt about trying to fill in a hole that taken 2 months to dig. So they used to just go down a yard or so and put some sticks down and shovel the dirt over the top. So that's why a lot of the mines have collapsed in like that. In fact, not long after we moved to Cockatoo Valley, we actually found one that had done exactly that. There was a lad looking over a fence at some cattle, and he was jumping up and down, and it went through, and it was a very deep shaft underneath. It's very dangerous, so don't go walking around hollows like that. Next slide. You can see from this how closely they work. As I said before, it's about a 20-foot square area they're allowed to do. One here, one over like that. Next one. A couple more, and you can tell by the size of these how deep the shafts were. Of course, the further up the hills they came, the deeper the shaft. Next slide. That gives you a bit of idea of how they were just all working together, side by side. There's shafts everywhere, and that's as it is today. I've got to tell you one little aside though that's interesting. My neighbour has a deep shaft on his property, and he decided once that he'd empty it out because it had been filled up. The farmer would use it as a rubbish tip. So every Saturday he'd get there and he dug and took the stuff out. And he said it was like going back through history. As he got to the bottom, he even got a horse skeleton out of it. But when he got to the bottom, the shafts, there was 2 tunnels on each side of the bottom of the mine, and he worked his way along one of these tunnels and got to the end, and it opened up into a cavern he could stand up in, and all the miner's tools were still there. His pick, his axe, and all his tools just there. So we don't know whether he struck gold and got out of it or just got sick of it. Interesting story though. It's a very deep shaft too. Next one. Towards the end of the 1880s and into the 1890s, a number of large companies established mines seeking reef gold. The Menzies Barossa was the deepest. This guy bought up all the other mines that were around the place at the time and sort of put it all into one big mine. In 1897, he took over the Royal Phoenix mine, several adjoining mines, and renamed the complex Menzies Barossa. Next one. And this is a picture of the Menzies Barossa shaft, or shafts and tunnels. This is the main shaft here, which is I think 65 metres deep. I think it's on the next slide. Phoenix tunnel, sorry, and just go back in, sorry. Some horizontal shafts, some vertical. Lady Pierce tunnel through this where they followed a reef in. And over here they had a battery for crushing the ore as it came out. Okay, next one. The main shaft, 65 metres deep, was shored with timber from the top to the bottom. It intersected several previous horizontal shafts. and so they installed a 40-head stamping battery. Remember I showed you the little model of the 5-head one at the start? We imagine what sort of noise and how big that 40-head stamper would have been. Just going all day long, lifting the weights up and dropping it on the ore and crushing it. So this was the largest battery ever installed in South Australia. It was huge. Okay, next. Then the big disaster. The first crushing of 1,500 tonnes yielded 30 ounces of gold. So they didn't do their homework very well, did they? Next one. The battery stopped, 105 employees dismissed, shares dropped from 4 shillings to 4 pence overnight. Total disaster. Company liquidated in 1899. Plant which had cost £10,000 sold for £2,500. So the man that made all the money was James Martin in Gawler, who made a lot of the equipment, heavy equipment for the mines. And that effectively ended the mining of the Barossa Goldfields area. Although people still scavenge around there today, even with metal detectors and that sort of thing. Right, next slide. This is the top of the main shaft, the Menzies Barossa shaft. That's all there is today. Just a big hole in the ground with a fence around it. Down the bottom in the lower parts you can see some of the brick walls or stone walls that were made at the time. Next one. This is a picture once again of photography, not that flash, but this is where the 40-head stamping head was in this building here, and you can see a little slide here. The skips would come down from the mine with the rough ore in, down here into a bucket, down here. There was a winding engine in here to let the skips go down slowly into this building where the ore was tipped out and crushed with the 40-head stamper. So you can get an idea of the size of the organisation. The winding engine then used cables to pull the skips back up to be refilled with ore that was coming down this way. Next one. This is a cross-section picture inside the battery house, and here is the 40-head stamper here. The rough ore would come in down the chute into the stamping head, crush, very noisy job, onto this amalgamating table here. And this particular one, they used mercury to separate the gold from the ore. So once the worst of the ore had been gone through, they took the gold, mixed with the mercury away to separate the two. That's how it was done in this particular case. It was called the battery house. Okay, next one. Now, because I had to shift the ore from the shaft to the crushing head, I had to go and build some tracks around the park, and one of the things I had to go through was a hill, so I built this tunnel. When we first found it many years ago, you could walk through that without any problems at all, but over the years it's fallen in, and that little thing there is a picture of my wife, so you get an idea of the size of it. But now the do-gooders have gone in and they've put a fence around it so you can't go anywhere near. It's pretty dangerous anyway because there's trees growing out of the top and that sort of thing. So it is fenced off, so all you can do is look in from the outside. Next slide. Has anybody seen this before? It used to be in the park here in Gawler for many, many years, and they wanted to get rid of it, so we took it. It's an 8-ton winding engine, so it would have had steel cables around these drums, and that would have been at the top of that hill with the steel cable going down to the battery house, pulling the skips up and letting them down. The big story is that as an organisation we wanted it on the property. The council in Gawler didn't want it, so we got a contractor to bring it in. It weighs 8 tonnes, as I said. But we wanted it down where it was originally. And of course the contractor said, no way. Very steep hill down there. I don't know how they got the equipment down there when they were doing the actual digging many years ago. But they were clever people with what they did. So that's just on the side of one of the tracks with a sign alongside it, just telling you what it's about. Right, next one. Just to conclude this talk, Joe Harris, you might remember, was the publican at Sandy Creek that found the first gold. He never got the full reward. They gave him £750. They'd offered £5,000, as I said before. But they gave him £750 and he had to split it amongst the men that were with him at the time. He didn't get to enjoy it for very long because he died when he was about 41. So next. Our open day this year will be on Sunday, 25th September. Come along and enjoy the day. If you're interested in that sort of thing, it is a great day. Next one. Just to recap on what we've covered, we talked about the formation of the society, Bowden's Cottage, various displays, Parawira Conservation Park trails, how it all started, Sims Rush and Lodescale Gold Mining. So next. We open the cottage every Tuesday morning from 9 a.m. till 12 noon, and that's a continuation from when the guys rebuilt the cottage in the first place. They come up every Tuesday morning, so we've always kept that open. So if you'd like to have a look, the cottage is open then. It's also open on the third Sunday each month from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Or look at our website. New members, we'd love you to be some new members because like most of these organisations, we're all getting older now. Okay, next one. Oh, it's just the acknowledgements. So thanks very much for that. Hope you've enjoyed it. Have anybody got any questions they'd like to answer? Yes.
I believe there's a lot of wildflowers that grow out there. Can you tell me what grows there?
I can't tell you. I got greasy fingers. My wife's the green fingers one. But Leonie here, every year our church runs a wildflower walk there. And we've got some flyers here about that now. If you just hold one of those up, Leonie. And so you're very welcome to come along.
29th of September.
Oh, lovely.
And you can go through there. And the wildflowers are all named. They go around the week before and put names on all of them. So it's a very enjoyable day.
The picture at the top there is a donkey walk, because we've got plenty of those to look at. And there's just so many, it's hard to list them all.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
It's really a bit of a comment. That was really an interesting talk, firstly. Great.
Thank you.
But the point is that the amount of gold that came from these places was very difficult to ascertain, to total up.
Correct.
And naturally the government, Wallace, wanted to have a good idea what was going on. This is always a source of money for the government to squander somewhere else. So when you come to the numbers, there's a bloke called John Drexel, I think, of the mines department. He made an estimate that there was something like 800 kilograms of gold, so something less than a tonne.
Okay.
Anyway, the figures tonight were somewhere between 50,000 ounces. That's a bit shy of a couple of tonnes of gold, and 100,000 ounces, which is say heading for 4 tonne. Now, a tonne of gold is about 14 inches cubed, right? Now, to put a figure on that for money, the 50,000 ounce one, a couple of tonnes, so it'll be about 28 inches by about a foot, 14 inches by 14, about that big. Right? And that would have been worth today, if you had it in one block and took it to the post office to sell it.
Bit hard to lift.
That'd be worth $135 million.
Wow. Yeah.
And then if it was double that, 100,000 ounces, they're heading for 4 tonnes, it'd be double that, so $270 million. So this is serious money. Mines make serious money. Right?
A lot of them didn't.
But it really, so another thing that he said was, Drexel said that the biggest nugget they had was something about as big as your finger. Finger. That'll be worth 10, 15 ounces. Worth about 30,000. But that amount of money, when you really bought it, is a hell of a lot of money for a few years of effort. And who knows how much more there was.
It's an unknown. It really is an unknown quantity.
But that would have been a huge contribution to the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why the government offered that huge reward, so people would go and find it. just as an aside to that, we have one of our members is a professional gold fossicker. He goes all over Australia. And a few years ago he came to one of our open days and he just had a big lump of gold in his hand. And someone asked him, how much are you made doing this? And he said, well, I can't tell you that, but I own my own house, I got my caravan, I travel all over Australia and not bothered with anybody. So he's made a lot. But he had this lump of gold and he's just letting people hold it around, and he put it in my hand. I went, God, I couldn't believe the weight of it. And I said, oh, what's that worth? And he said, about $13,000. So I gave it back to him pretty quick. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting characters. I mean, we could talk a long time about what's happened out there, and this is just a brief overview. But I hope you've enjoyed that anyway. It's been interesting telling you all about it. Yes?
How far is the Lady Alice mine from Humbug Scrub? Next door.
Yeah, nearly.
Next door.
Yes,
Humbug Scrub and Lady Alice is next door.
if you come up from the One Tree Hill and you come to the front of the gates of the park, and if you keep going onto the road instead of turning into the park, nearly a kilometre along that road you'll just see a little sign on a gate. That's where the Lady Alice mine was, and you can go in there, and just, well, maybe 50 metres past that gate, there's a remnant of their big hall, which all the stonework's there, it hasn't got a roof on it, but that's there. You walk further down, and there was a real town down there. That was a very payable thing. There was a lot of people in that mine.
Yeah, I have got a picture of it. My great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather both worked in the Lady Alice mine.
Did they really?
And my grandfather was born at Humbug Scrub.
Oh, okay.
At the time, yeah.
Yeah. Now that was a big concern. There were houses down there. And I think Leslie might correct, Leonie might correct me here. The captain's cottage is still there, pretty intact, isn't it?
Yeah, only just.
Yeah.
It's still got a tin roof on it.
Yeah, vandals get into these things when they're just left.
But once again, the area is being fenced at the moment, so hopefully that will stop the vandalism on the cottage.
Yeah, they had a huge dam there as well that was built. That's still active, I believe, or still there. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Yeah, Vincent, do you use QR codes up there if you go walking up there? Is there a sort of signage, or can you use your phone and other
It's pretty well marked with self-interpretive signs. Leslie will keep calling them my wife's name, but it's not my wife. Leonie will put you right on that one.
You can actually download an app. It's called Avenda Maps, Avenda PDF Maps, which gives you the same picture that you put up there of the trails. So you're not going to get lost if you've got that on there. It's very accurate. But it's sort of downloads all of the national parks, and it's very handy, very easy to use.
And you do have to be really aware of your surroundings when you go in there, because the bush is pretty dense and there's lots of shafts. If you get off the trails, you could easily fall down one. It's quite dangerous. That's why they fence a lot of it off. Yep.
I'm assuming from what you said that there is nowhere you can go to do fossicking for gold.
Not up here, but you can fossick in Mount Crawford, and you can fossick at Jupiter Creek down the other side of town. You're allowed to take detectors in there.
You need to get a permit from Mount Crawford at least, and probably Jupiter Creek.
Yeah, permit to
It's
do
only
it.
about $5 or something, so it's not much.
And you get that from the council or something?
No, you've got to go to the Mount Crawford Forestry office.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Yes?
Just thank you for your talk, it's really interesting. But just to continue with David, I mean, that mine brought lots of money back to Gawler. Joe Harris married into the Williston Davies family, and he actually ran the Williston General Store before he went on to
Did he really? Okay.
And then Hodgkin and Clements, which is where the physio is now opposite Williston, they was a butcher, and they ran their butchery. They did an extension of the butchery out to the mine.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, selling meat to the miners. So some of that money did drift back into Gawler.
Yeah.
And it's on the edge. It's part of the community. So thank you.
It was being lost in history. It really was, and we think we've resurrected it a fair bit. And the park people have been very good. They help us a lot, and we help them a lot too. So it's a win-win situation. Now, Leonie has a few pamphlets there if you'd like to get one. One of them is about our organisation itself, and the other one is one of the Mines Department put out many years ago, but it's still very relevant. It's got the trails and what's in there. So if you'd like to grab one of those. Okay, so thanks very much for letting us tell you about the Goldfield.
Okay, excellent presentation tonight, and I will now call on Anne, my lovely wife, to come up and do the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynton, very much. It was a very well constructed and informative presentation. I enjoyed it very much. You've obviously been volunteering for many years and with other local charities as well. What would we do without volunteers? So for those of us who might not have been out to the Goldfields, hopefully this will be the impetus for us to all sort of take a look. So thank you very much.
And just before you sit down, we do have a little presentation for our guest speakers. Unfortunately, it's all healthy. Okay, so that's why you brought the Arnie to actually carry the goods as well. So no, thank you very much again, and had a really, really good night. Thank you. Okay, cheers.